All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about Operation Cedar Falls today. This was the single largest American ground operation of the entire Vietnam War. It was supposed to be this massive, decisive blow, but well, its legacy is anything but straightforward. And you can see that conflict right from the get-go. On one side, you have General William Dupuy, a key commander, calling it a decisive turning point. But then you look at what most historians say today, and they call it a major example of U.S. misconceptions. A success and a failure? So that's the big question, right? How can one single operation be seen as both a total success and a complete strategic failure at the same time? To figure that out, we've got to break down what actually happened. And our story really begins with the target, because to understand the operation, you first have to understand this place called the Iron Triangle. Now, this wasn't just some random spot in the jungle. The Iron Triangle was a massive Viet Cong stronghold, and look how close it was, just 20 kilometers north of Saigon, the capital. It was so close and so dangerous that it was literally described as a dagger pointed at the heart of Saigon.
So, the plan to deal with this threat was ambitious. It was a classic military maneuver called the hammer and anvil. The idea is simple, really. First, you create the anvil. That's 30,000 troops completely surrounding the area so nobody can get out. Then you bring down the hammer. More forces that sweep through the inside, crushing the enemy against the troops waiting on the outside. The goal? Total annihilation.
But how this plan was actually carried out? Well, it went way beyond just fighting enemy soldiers. The strategy became one of search, destroy, and, perhaps most controversially, deport. Things kicked off with a surprise helicopter assault on a village called Ben Suk. And this was no ordinary village. It was basically the nerve center for the Viet Cong in the Iron Triangle, their main supply hub and political headquarters. After taking the village, the U.S. command made a truly drastic decision. They decided to deport the entire civilian population. We're talking 6,000 people, forced to leave their homes. And what's just staggering is that 2/3 of them were children. You know, even the American commanders there were deeply affected by what they saw. General Bernard Rogers, an assistant division commander, he wrote about it later. He said the sight of the natives with their carts, chickens, hogs, rice was pathetic and pitiful. It really gives you a sense of the human tragedy unfolding. And after the people were gone, the goal became to literally erase the area from the map. Every home was burned. Huge armored bulldozers came in and just flattened everything. The ruins, the jungle, all of it. Specialized soldiers, the famous tunnel rats, went down into the Viet Cong's complex tunnel systems to clear them out. And finally, the whole region was declared a free fire zone. Basically, anything that moved there was now considered hostile. So, after all of that, after this massive, destructive effort, how did the military grade its own performance? Well, let's take a look at the official scorecard they used to declare victory. If you just look at the numbers, it seems like a clear win. I mean, 720 enemy killed, compared to 72 American losses. Hundreds of enemy captured, hundreds of weapons seized, over 500 enemy structures destroyed. Based on this data, on this scorecard, the operation was officially labeled an unqualified success. But here's the kicker, the fatal flaw in the whole thing. It turns out the main Viet Cong fighting forces weren't even there. They had slipped away before the operation began. And just 2 days after the Americans left declaring victory, the Viet Cong started moving right back in. And this right here brings us back to our original question. How can something be a success and a failure? Well, it's all about the massive difference between winning a single battle and actually winning a war. So here's the bottom line, and why most historians call it a failure. Sure, the Viet Cong were inconvenienced, but only for a little while. The real long-term damage was to the American cause. Forcibly removing 6,000 people and bulldozing their homes didn't win over any hearts and minds. In fact, it did the exact opposite. It created thousands of new enemies, driving civilians who might have stayed neutral straight into the arms of the Viet Cong. Which leaves us with this really tough question. Operation Cedar Falls proves that you can dominate the battlefield, you can rack up impressive stats, and you can achieve all your military objectives. But in a war for hearts and minds, if your actions end up creating more enemies than you defeat, have you actually won anything at all?